Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first in our smorgasbord of interesting nuggets? Well, Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban is in Washington to push for the end of American military support for Ukraine. His target audience, US conservatives. Dear fellow conservatives, this is from Ivana Stradner, and I said I'd go through this thread. Orban is no conservative. He is an opportunist who is far from a model for American values. Don't fall for Orban's game. Let's go and see what she has to say about Viktor Orban. So Orban is using culture wars to achieve his foreign policy objectives. He said that Hungary is the laboratory with the antidote for progressive dominance. You see this an awful lot, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole where if a party or a political entity or a person completely focuses on culture wars things, and I said this with regard to the recent GOP primary debate where they spent 17 minutes talking about trans toilets. If there's so much focus on culture wars, then it is a distraction away from something else, because those things have very little impact, actual, tangible, meaningful impact on people's day-to-day existences. How many times do you come into contact with issues of trans toilets, like in your, rather than just arguing online about stuff, in the actual day-to-day existence that you have? It doesn't happen. How much do you come into contact with economic policies, employment, tax, the environment all the time when you walk outside, when you're interacting with others, when you're dealing with the welfare state and with your job and looking for jobs and so on and so forth? These are the things that politicians should be talking about if they want to have tangible effect on your lives. When they don't talk about that, when they fixate on culture wars issues, it is because they have nothing to say about that. They have no ideas about how to truly make your life or your lives better. And if they have no real tangible ideas about how to make your lives better, what are they doing in politics? So it becomes just about whinging about stuff to try and get into power, to then do things that benefit themselves rather than benefiting you, the people. It's campaigning on a foundation of fear and playing on people's fears and playing on ideas of change, or that these others are going to take something away from you. You know, immigrants, trans, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Now, it's not to say there aren't issues to be debated there, and it's not to say, for example, with immigration, there aren't immigration issues. But if your sole fixation is with these ideas, then it is diverting you from real issues. So when we see Viktor Orban, when you see in Zakarpattia, which is a place of Hungarian ethnic origins inside Ukraine, in the kind of western areas of Ukraine, when you've got 60-year-old Hungarian Ukrainians complaining about trans people and saying Putin is the answer because he's a real man, they have been sold these ideas. And that then becomes what drives them to have, to have the political opinions they do, rather than, meaningful political debates or arguments or rationale or policies themselves. That, just be warned, if you are focused on these things, just be warned. What are you not focusing on? What's being allowed to happen while you're focusing on these things? Right, sorry, that's my rabbit hole over. I'll get back to it now. So the Kremlin released its national security concept of 2000, stressing a connection between national security and traditional values. Russian foreign policy concept of 2023 identifies, quote, strengthening traditional Russian spiritual and moral values as key national security interests. If you think culture wars are all there is to conservative politics, Orban is your man. By holding him as a paragon of conservatism, one has to discard free market economics. This is okay. I don't want to keep interrupting, but this is really important. I talked about this over a year ago now, but I'm going to come back to it. Right, there is a massive contradiction in left-right economic politics. And that's because the left-right spectrum is actually not good enough. I've talked to you before about the political compass, which is a quadrant. It's far more effective and representative of who we are. But if you want to go to the simplistic left-right spectrum, then you get into trouble because there's a massive contradiction that exists in both the left and the right. So the left say we want more government, and government's going to have control over most things, or very much control over economic strategy and policy, right? But socially and culturally, the left say, hey, you can do what you want. You know, we're talking about cultural, liberal, social, moral leftism here. It's like, yeah, you can do what you want. As long as you're not affecting me or others, you can go and sleep with who you want to sleep with. You can have whatever proclivities you want. That's cool. You can do what you want. But the government is going to have an effect on what goes on in society outside of that. That's interesting. So the government is big but small. Now, if you're on the right, you're generally into free market economics, where you say, hey, government, don't get involved. Do not get involved in the economy, in regulating what financial institutions can do, in regulating what individuals can do. I don't want to pay tax. I don't want the government intervening in my life. So that's the right, the libertarian right, particularly. But generally, the right is about small government, lower tax. So say, I don't want the government interfering in my life, apart from I want it interfering in every aspect of people's social and moral lives. You can't have an abortion. You can't sleep with who you want to sleep with. We're going to get government to say that's illegal. You can't identify as this. You can't have that sexual preference. The government is going to outlaw that. But it won't get involved in economics. It won't get involved in, welfare state, blah, blah, blah. So you're like, hang on. Both of you guys have got the government either big in one area. Both of you guys have got the government being big in one area, but non-existent in the other area. How can you justify those double standards? And I think this is what Ivana Stradner here is talking to. If you think culture wars is all there is to conservative politics, Orban is your man. But what about these other ideas like free market economics? Orban used price controls, government-created monopolies and ad hoc levies on foreign-owned companies. And I'm sure she's going to talk about freedom of press as well. So actually, there isn't a free market in Hungary like most conservatives would advocate. And there certainly isn't freedom of speech. Did you know that he has arbitrarily revoked the broadcasting licenses of media outlets critical of his government and has encouraged the concentration of media ownership into the hands of an opaque foundation administered by his cronies? It is one thing to praise Hungary from the comfort of the US constitutional protections. It is quite another to experience Hungary's version of cancel culture, in which voicing a critical opinion leads to a loss of employment, harassment of or government-sponsored sting operations. And this goes back to, I've had debates about cancel culture. I'm on the left, right? I've literally lost 2 jobs by being cancelled by the religious right. So yeah, if you want to talk about cancel culture, I can speak to you from personal opinion that I have been cancelled. I have lost 2 jobs as a result of my liberal positioning. But nonetheless, what else is there to Hungary's conservatism? Some conservatives praise Hungarian family policy, which involves generous benefits to parents. Yet Hungary's birth rate has barely budged, remaining less than 1.5 per woman, lower than America's current rate of 1.7 per woman. Immigration. Tucker Carlson is enamoured of Hungary's anti-immigration policies. Don't forget, current refugee wave from Ukraine aside, Hungary is not a very attractive destination for migrants. In fact, Hungarian population has declined by 250,000 due to ageing and emigration. National sovereignty. It's hard to take Orban's PNs to the nation state seriously, given his own revisionism that would like to see the 1921 Trianon Treaty revised and the territories of surrounding countries returned to Hungary. If you remember, he wore a scarf that had the historical Hungarian borders. In other words, he's advocating imperialistically taking territory from neighbouring countries. His Euroscepticism, meanwhile, squares oddly with the fact that Hungary is among the largest recipients of EU funds per capita. raking in over €500 per person. If you do like Mr. Orban's idiosyncratic domestic policies and want to label them as conservatism, so be it. Semantics aside, Hungary remains one of the most pro-Russian and pro-Chinese countries in Europe. Krzysztof Saleh Bobrovnitsky has extensive business interests in Russia. The Hungarian government even went out of its way to stop the planned EU sanctions on the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill, known for his weakness for Breguet timepieces. Hungary was also among the first European countries to join China's Belt and Road Initiative and maintains a strategic partnership with Beijing in fields from vaccines production to digital industries. Orban rebuked the Trump administration's warnings over his security risks posed by Huawei. The Chinese giant also established a research and development center in Budapest in 2020, and Mr. Orban tried to lure to great public outcry, Shanghai's Fudan University to open a campus in Hungary. Orban has been fair weather friend to the US, demographically challenged, and internationally it's the wrong place to look for answers about US conservatism. The sooner conservatives realise that they are being taken for a ride, the better. Having grown up in Hungary's backyard and being proud of our conservative credentials, and she talks about here Dalibor Rohach, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. So that is very much free market American conservatism, libertarian conservatism. So Rohach and I are aware of the dangers that Orban's brand of nationalism poses to regional stability and also to American interests. We explain it there in a New York Sun piece. So this is an actual conservative saying, be wary of Orban. He's an authoritarian. If you really value democracy, democratic institutions and mechanisms, Orban is not your guy. If you value First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, Orban is not your guy. If you value free market economics, Orban is not your guy. If you value American hegemony over and above Russian and Chinese hegemony, Orban is not your guy. Whether you're a liberal American or a conservative American, Orban is not your guy. And I think that's really important to remember. He is the bad guy of Europe, in my books. Right, Dara Masico, and just to remind you who she is, she's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Russia and Eurasia program, so she knows her Russia. For those in town making choices on security assistance to Ukraine, if you need more reasons, then I have a warning to share with you about the Kremlin. I feel that I have a duty to warn. The Kremlin is starting to gloat about it. That it is beating us, the West. If they feel, and I went through this with the propagandists talking on TV this morning, if they feel like they can win by outlasting the political will of the US and Europe about Ukraine, they will become much worse in the years to come, cocky and partially reconstituted. It is my job to look at different futures being rebuilt on the horizon, and I tell you that a bruised, vengeful and overconfident Russia is one of them, and that I see that we are on a path to now, unless choices are made right now. Why? Every time the Russians think that they have won in a conflict under Putin, Georgia 2008, Ukraine 2014, Syria 2015, they learn something about us, and they've become overconfident in their abilities, and in a few years they try bigger and bolder operations. I mean, that is what Ukraine is. They've learnt from Syria, learnt from Georgia, learnt from 2014 Ukraine. Right, we can do this. We can do this. They were way too overconfident and they bit off more than they could chew, but now they're thinking probably at the moment, well, we probably can do this. If the Kremlin concludes that they can outlast Ukraine and Western support, they will tell themselves they overcame or defeated the US and NATO intelligence, planning, weapons, tactics, will, and defense production. It would be an inaccurate but dangerous conclusion for them to arrive at. If Russia were to conclude that their repetitive brute force methods and DIB can overcome Western aid to Ukraine and outlast NATO political will and types of support, the outcome would be very dangerous. And it must not be allowed to happen. It could upend deterrence. Prior to 2022, the Russians believed they had several economic, political and military disadvantages vis-à-vis NATO. If they snatch a type of victory in Ukraine by exhausting and outlasting Ukraine and the West, I believe they will downgrade the assessments about NATO power. Essentially, if Russia were to prevail, NATO loses, NATO becomes obsolete, and the entire Western military alliance and cooperation is thrown to the wind. There's a lot on the line here. There really is a lot on the line. The most important reason to continue to fund security assistance to Ukraine is for Ukraine. They want to live free from Kremlin subjugation and brutality. They fight hard and they do not ask anyone to fight for them. Look what they've done already to the Russian army. Have a look at these demands from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They want the West to give up and for Ukraine to give up and live in subjugation. It is not subtle. So the MFA spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, recently stated Russian conditions for peace in Ukraine, and they included the West stopping military support of Ukraine, the Western Ukraine accepting new territorial realities, Ukraine ceases all military activities, and Ukraine is fully demilitarized and denazified. Military of Ukraine is removed from Russian territory. Ukraine accepts status as non-aligned, and the status of Russian language is guaranteed. Wow. It's pretty maximalist, right? It is appropriate to talk about strategy for 2024 and matching ends, ways and means. That is a good idea, and it's time to do it. Open door offer to talk, but stopping aid now would mean giving up on Ukrainian soldiers in the field. It is in our interest to continue supporting Ukraine for many reasons. Inaction at a critical time could lead once again to a vicious, regenerating and overconfident Kremlin in the years ahead, and will be a political and military catastrophe for all. Right, now on to Kyiv Independent, reporting on a study that Ukraine has lost 18% of its scientists. And you could probably take the word scientist there and replace it with all sorts of different categories. And Ukraine has lost percentage of war is tough. Ukraine has lost 18% of its scientists since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, according to a study published by École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, EPFL, on the 11th. Our survey shows that Ukraine has lost almost 20% of top scientists, says the study's research lead, Gaëtan de Rassenfoss, an associate professor in science and technology policy there. Ukraine has suffered significant brain drain since the beginning of Russia's invasion, having lost experts in virtually every field. Over 1/3 of the Ukrainian population, estimated 44 million in 2021, has been displaced. And as of November the 14th, there are 6.3 million recorded refugees globally. So given 44 million, that's 38 million left in Ukraine, but actually many of those are displaced within Ukraine. And Greg Terry was saying that his figures he had heard locally in Ukraine was actually there's 28 million people left in Ukraine. So, some people are touting that as many as 16 million people are not in Ukraine. For compared to February 2022. According to the study, 23.5% of scientists still living in Ukraine have lost access to critical input for their research, and 20.8% cannot physically access their institution. Quote, of the scientists who stay in Ukraine, if still alive, about 15% have left research, and others have little time to devote to research given the circumstances of war. So not only are they missing a large tranche of scientists, but they are also struggling, those scientists who remain, to do their job as scientists. They've either left the job itself and moved on to something else, or even if they are remaining in post, it's so difficult to do their work given the context of being in a country at war. Okay, we're going to go to a Romanian analysis here from Radu Hosu, someone I've referred to a number of times. So, what does he have to say? Some ideas instead of the night summary. One, the mouth of the Danube. So the Danube is a river right at the bottom of where the Ukraine border is, bordering Romania, where Ismail and Reni are two Danube River ports that have been struck by Russia repeatedly. Anyway, more and more information is reaching my ears from people with connections in Ukrainian intelligence. No, I'm not bragging. There is nothing out of the ordinary, who tell me that the current military orders from Putin to the FSB and further to the Russian military is that after a long wait in which the collective West will tire and no longer support Ukraine, Russia must reach the mouth of the Danube. And of course, there is nothing remotely surprising about that. Let's just have a quick look at the map again. This is, of course, to say that and we heard this from Russian generals, that they want to go to Transnistria, but also that they would like Transnistria as well, which is sorry, that is just this part of Moldova around there, and then something like that. That is what they would like, this area there. And the Danube is down here. So the Danube comes up along the border of, it is the border of Ukraine and Romania. And we have Reni and Ismail there. So they would definitely like to get to the Danube, according to Radu Hosu. He says, please take this information with a pinch of skepticism, but not much. Why not too much? Well, in February, March 2022, Russia will be near the center of Mykolaiv with the declared aim of seizing Odessa and thus reaching the border with Romania. What would be the interest? The territorial one, obviously. Another economic, the Danube ports, and another of strategic influence, see the Romanian continental shelf, where we have a lot of oil and natural gas. One by the decision in the Court of The Hague, a decision that Russia could ignore. In other words, if you cut Ukraine completely off from the sea, then not only do you control, if you're going to allow Ukraine to exist in some kind of state, as Zakharova suggested in that Daramasiko thread, where this will all be Russian language will be spoke everywhere. Ukraine will be non-aligned. There'd be denazified, so there'd be a new government. It would be a vassal state of Russia, but Russia would also have much more robust control over the land they have now and the land to Transnistria, which means that Ukraine proper would have no access to the Black Sea, and they would be unable to do grain export unless it went through Russia proper, as they would see it, and tariffs would be levied or whatever. And so this would absolutely hobble Ukraine's ability to become an economically sustainable, really. So there are lots of reasons they would want to go all that way to Odessa and to the Danube. I wonder what the AUR, the pro-Russian party in Romania, would say, a party that officially in its state says it fights for Romania's interests, financed through complex financial maneuvers by Russia itself, and with the president, George Simeon, who declares union with the Republic of Moldova, where, ironically, it is banned precisely because it is in bed with the Russian enemy. I wonder how the discussion about the false Bistro Canal theme launched by the lying Romanian Minister of Transport, Sorin Grindeanu, who raised the ball to AUR's net, later contradicted by President Iohannis himself, would have been. And I'm not too sure of the details there. I wonder if the reserve generals and specialists in Danubian flora and fauna would still be on all the TV channels to rave not about Ukraine, but Russia, our new neighbour, or would they be silent out of fear? For those who think this scenario is implausible because Romania is a NATO member, let's not forget the drones that hit Romania's territory, into which President Iohannis said, if this proves to be the case, this is unacceptable and we will take all the necessary measures. The speech is correct. The actions, I don't know what they were, though. So you have this situation where you've got very nationalistic Romanians who are also very much in bed with the Russian regime. If Russia was to be knocking on their door, if Russia was to become Romania's neighbour, and think of the history of Romania and Ceausescu, then what would those nationalists then think? Oh, I'm heavily nationalist, but now I'm going to have to give up some of our national sort of integrity to Russia, and Russia might help themselves to our oil and to the continental shelf here, etc., etc. You see these rigs there. Romania will have, no doubt, things out here. What would Russia, being their overbearing neighbour, have to say about that? And as far as the Republic of Moldova goes, also based on this information about the order that in a relatively short time and with a lack of support from the West, if the Russians were to reach Odessa, they would have a direct line to Transnistria, which they could not only support militarily, but also directly influence through pressure, intimidation, maybe even the little green men, the elections and democracy in the Republic of Moldova. You can absolutely bet that if Russia did take the land up to Odessa, up to the Transnistrian border, well, really the Moldovan border, that Transnistria would then be a part of Russia, and then they would start by a sort of osmosis, having a much greater influence on the political outcomes in Moldova itself. Moldova's already been part of the strategy, right? There are leaked papers on the strategy in this area, in the Baltics, in these other nations that Michael Weiss of Yahoo News has got hold of, and I had 3 separate video segments on those different strategies, looking at Belarus, the Baltics, and then Moldova, Romania down here. It's already part of their strategy, and if Russia owned this or controlled this territory next door, then they controlled Transnistria, and soon enough they would control Moldova, you would think, and then Romania would be in the sights. I wonder if the Republic of Moldova still is Romania's little sister. Don't we care about Moldova anymore, or do they only guard us on TV shows where we have to look good, and otherwise we don't give a damn about those who consider themselves Romanians by language, traditions, history, and dream, if not of a de facto union with Romania, of a union by joining the Republic of Moldova to the European Union. If we still care about it, then surely we have to support Ukraine in its fight with Russia, for the sake of Romania and for the sake of the Republic of Moldova. If not, then at least let's say so publicly, and then at least we know what we are expecting, so that we don't fool ourselves or them. He goes on to talk about international aid and a whole lot of other things. I'm not going to go into that, but I just thought it'd be interesting to have a little thought about Moldova and Romania and really what Russia are planning. And it goes back to what I've been saying a number of times recently, that their maximalist intentions are the whole of Ukraine. Their minimalist intentions would be that land corridor. And then any number of those points that Zakharova laid out here as well. I don't know what would be non-negotiable for Russia, but I think as far as Putin negotiating some kind of lasting peace, I don't think he would accept anything other than a land bridge to here. But that's never going to happen. So maybe he will have to eventually, repeal that idea and settle for the land bridge as it presently exists. But he certainly is going to. He's not going to negotiate away Crimea. But then the same can be said about Zelensky and the Ukrainians. And that's where I'm going to leave it today, because I was going to spend some time going through this article in the Kyiv Independent about Denmark supporting Mykolaiv Oblast. But actually, it's quite a big article that I think demands a much larger segment. So I'm going to leave that for tomorrow or another day. I will leave you with this, however. Just go and check. I'll try and remember. In fact, what I'll do is I'll add this as I'm going to save that to my recommended Ukraine videos playlist. So you can check that playlist out on my homepage to this channel. So you click on ATP Geopolitics and add and watch that playlist. It's got some great videos on. This is one from TV Rain. So TV Rain is an exiled Russian media outlet. TV Rain Newsroom here does a video on useful idiots. These are people mainly in Europe, but there is one American, Scott Bennett, people who are manipulated by the Kremlin and who act as mouthpieces for the Kremlin in different countries. So you've got a Belgian, you've got French, you've got a German, a number of different people here. You might have heard of some of these people. Andrei Chanclu, Vito Grattani, so he's Italian, Chris Roman, Scott Bennett, Arnaud Develay, Thomas Roper. So yeah, it's a useful video in understanding the insidious nature of Russian information warfare as it seeps into each of our countries around the world. But anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all of your support. It means a heck of a lot. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.